I am David Connor, for those of you who are new, and those of you who were here last month, same person, so haven't changed. Today, what we want to do is update you on our progress for the conceptual design. Last time we talked about our evaluation of the existing divisions. Today is talking more about what we see as the future, and so the objective is to give you that update. We're going to present some ideas, hopefully have a discussion or some open dialogue about that, and get your feedback on your thoughts and so forth. The goals of our project are to improve the character and quality of the public areas. We're talking about the character, the aesthetics of the community, to tell the unique history of Drew Park. Last time we talked about the history a bit, and I'm not going to go over that again, but that's a part of what we're programmed to do. And to begin the process of establishing a new and positive image of the redevelopment area. Last time, again, we went over the data collection. We talked about the fact that Drew Park really has no identity. You can't find it. You can't distinguish where Drew Park starts and stops. You might because you live here, but people outside of Drew Park don't know when they drive by. I mean, I talk to many people and tell them I'm working in Drew Park. Many of them say, where is Drew Park? These are people that live here, have lived here for a long period of time. There's the streets. The way that the streets are designed right now, most of them don't have curbs. The sidewalks are next to the curbs, and because there are no curbs, because the sidewalks are there, there's a lot of misuse of the right-of-way that happens. One of the things we asked last time, we heard a lot about in the comments, was a lot of concern over the way that vehicles use the right-of-way in many ways, and that's inappropriate, creates an unsafe walking condition. It's real difficult. Can we flip the lights down, at least up here in the front? It might be easier to see some of these. You can see this truck is parked. Hope this is nobody here's truck parking, but that truck is parked on the sidewalk, and see that the kids are walking on the other side of the street where there is no sidewalk. So that's kind of indicative. Here you see people parked on the sidewalk. We see that. Obviously, you guys see that. It's common occurrence. Goes throughout. There's a lot of sidewalks that are disconnected, they're broken, they've been run over. There's you see an awful lot of this. There's trash cans, obviously trash pickup on the sidewalk. Some streets there's dumpsters down that are accessing the street. It's a common occurrence throughout the community. There is, as we just talked, there's plans for the new storm piping that will be along Lois and proposed along Grady. But throughout the rest of the community, the ditches that exist on every street are still planned to remain. And the funds, the cost associated with making those go away is so prohibitive that at this point we don't see that for the near future being a change. So we want to deal with that as part of this plan. Obviously, there's overhead utilities throughout. We've got a lot of tree issues, and that creates an issue with tree planting throughout the community. Every street has overhead power lines. Again, another issue. We'd love to be able to put some of the utilities underground. That's a very expensive procedure. We may be able to do it in some limited areas, but generally we're going to be dealing with overhead power lines as a part of our design effort going forward. There's a lot of growth expectations. I know right now we're all in a really, the world's in a funk right now. There's not a lot going on in any location. There's not a lot of plans for growth, but that will all come back. The airport has plans for future expansion along Cargo Road, and that will create more demand on the west side of Drew Park, and especially for traffic moving through Drew Park, and that will happen. Their plan, the plan that we reviewed was a 2025 master plan, but obviously, master plans are just an outline for where we're going. We just know that's a part of it. Hillsborough Community College, I skipped over that, also has a master plan, as most large institutions and facilities do, and they have future growth plans and want to grow, and so that's something that we want to make sure that we're accommodating, at least anticipating as a part of the development of this plan, both the impacts that they might have, but also, from a facilities and building and construction, but also the increased amount of pedestrian activity that could be associated with future expansion of Hillsborough Community College, because you're seeing more associated housing and communication or frequent access by people that are students that are living in the residential area of the community. There's a lot of businesses out there, a lot of properties that are for lease or for sale today. Again, those are the types of facilities that are properties that we see in the future probably being redeveloped or new development take place. It's a slow process in a community like this, but that certainly is a part of what growth will happen. And then there is plans for, actually within the CRA, there's desires to have new affordable housing development. But there's a lot of housing product down there, and there's a lot of opportunity for more housing in the residential area. So that could be increased growth. So we're today really trying to outline how we go forward. And I want to tell you, we've done a lot of work to see there's, I don't know, there's 14 boards around this room. I also have with me Kyle Steele, who's in the back. If Kyle would raise your hand, because I want people to know. Kyle is working with me, and Ann Pham is right here. Ann and Kyle and myself are all here in order to talk through some of the details of each one of these specific locations. But I didn't want to get into all of the specifics of each location. So my presentation is going to be a summary. And then I hope what we can do is talk more specifically in areas that you might be more concerned about. And I'll address some of the major issues with the streetscape that are more community-wide in the presentation. We identified four, I think it's when I speak louder, I'll try and not speak fast enough. Four objectives of this particular project. First, we want to identify a long-range plan. The plan that would encompass everything and give you a roadmap for where you're going. Two, we wanted to identify improvements that can be accomplished quickly. Something that shows activity, something that shows and begins the idea, or begins a process of communicating a new vision for Drew Park. Three, we wanted to make improvements that would become a part of these planned projects that were ready to go to the boards and be constructed. So in a year or two, as those projects are implemented, they are implemented consistent with a long-term plan. So when they are complete, you would see the idea for further implementation and long-range implementation. And then four, set the standards for continued implementation, because a project like this with as many roads and streets and residents and properties will take years to fully implement, in all honesty. This is not something that's going to happen quick. This is a large community with a lot of areas. And at some point along the way, we'll have to prioritize those areas. We're not at that point today. We established, based upon the review, the data collection, a master plan and 7 master plan elements that we would want to address as part of this project. I've kind of touched on a few of these, but I want to get into them in more specific detail now. The first one we've talked about is this idea of creating a new identity. There's been a lot of talk about a gateway. In the action plan that was completed several years ago, they referred to a gateway. Gateways are a common element that symbolize when you enter from one place into another. They give you the idea that you've now passed through a space and you're into a new space. So that oftentimes, you may think of a gateway as being a specific place or a specific object, but in reality, what we look at as far as gateways can be any number of the things that you would pass through that would begin to transfer and communicate the idea that you're in that new space. The other thing is that we want to create a perimeter identity, because this is a unique location. You have a lot of perimeter, especially along Hillsborough Avenue and Dale Mabry, the two most heavily traveled roadways. Your CRA now has a lot of frontage along there, and it's inconsistent, and there is nothing really there that would begin to tell you that this is where Drew Park is. So we want to come up with a way to begin to identify that overall perimeter, the overall scope of the community. Then, secondly, we want to identify historical markers, both inside the community itself with historic sites. There are a few places that there is some historic significance, but also in a specific area to communicate to people what the history of Drew Park is. And so we're going to talk about that and where we think that's appropriate. 3, we want to create an interconnected system of walks and trails. We want to transfer what is now really not a pedestrian-friendly environment into a pedestrian-friendly environment. The reason we want to do that is, if you're here for business, you may think, well, I don't need pedestrian. I don't need that. I drive to my business. I park my car. I work in my business, and and people who come to my business just they come and they drive, no problem. But a large part of what happens in this community is residential, and it is largely congregated down in this area, but it's sprinkled throughout the community. And redevelopment of residential and the continued preservation of that residential element is important for your long-term viability. You want that mix. You don't want to become just a business identity, because there's a lot in the future as we continue to grow and infill and development. That mix will create a lot of opportunities, both for people who work here, and to live and work in the same environment. And if you create a better system of walkways, a better system of trails, it will be more attractive and more feasible for them to move throughout the community. Also, there's a lot of children, and we saw, throughout the community, you see a lot of children, and those children go to bus stops, and so we want to provide safe access to bus stops and safe ways for children to move in and out of the community. That's a big part of a community like this redevelopment. So it's an important aspect. It's also one other thing. Even families or family units that don't have children today, one of the big things that they're looking for, one of the studies show that one of the favorable aspects of the community or decision-making process of the community is whether that community is walkable. There's a lot of attention being put on the ability to get outside your home and to walk throughout the community. It's very important, and we're seeing values of communities improve because it is walkable. Fourthly, we want to develop a solution for this drainage problem. Right now you have ditches, and we've kind of laughingly joked about ditches because it's not what we like to call them. They're swales. It's a nicer term, but the conveyance of stormwater is very important. So we think that there's a solution there that we can address for a more positive way of keeping the swales. And this has been developing over the last several years. It's a concept called bioswales. They're both planted and lawn type bioswales, but it's a way of providing a more maintainable solution and a more attractive solution for dealing with these surface water conveyance systems. Okay? Oops. The other thing is we want to develop a passive park. The action plan identified 2 parks should be a part of this project, of this community. After talking to the Parks Department, we kind of honed that into the reality that maybe it would be better to create a linear park that goes throughout the community, and the idea of interconnected walkways would be a park system, and then a smaller, more focused park that would address the needs of maybe active persons, both children and young adults and adults, such as basketball and so forth. So I'm going to address that briefly. Artwork. Something that's come up is the importance of artwork. We've talked a lot about it, not in this group, and I'm going to talk more about it today because we think that artwork communicates a certain attitude about a community. And if we can envelop or incorporate artwork as a part of this project, it shows that you're a creative, progressive community of artists. So we think that's important. I think that can build upon telling the story of the park. And then coordinated site lighting and site furnishings, something that we think will help to create this overall image of what the community is like. Okay, so let me go through this. There are really 3 steps that we see in communicating this perimeter. The first one is that you have major signalized intersections, and really along Dale Mabry here at MLK. You also have this one that is at Tampa Bay and at Hillsborough on Lois. These are where, traditionally, if you ask anybody where is the entrance to Drew Park, or where you drive, if you're driving to Drew Park, that's where you direct it. That's where you get your highest volumes of traffic. And so those become places where we want to incorporate a gateway. There's also an issue associated with them because of the speed of people moving through there, because of just the limited amounts of right-of-way that we have there. So we have some concerns. We can't do the same types of markers that you would do. I mean, there's no room to do some sort of arch. There's no room to do some sort of really grand tower or something like that. So we have to come up with something that is more appropriate in scale and more conducive to community. The other thing is perimeter. I've called them for this meeting signage location. We have mostly identified these as identifiers. As not so much signage for the community, but more to identify that this is the community of Drew Park. And we think that that should happen at these perimeter roadways along Dale Mabry. So you get a consistent pattern of something that happens so that you see that from one place to the next, and you begin to understand that what is happening there is that is an entry into Drew Park. We think that it's important for these pieces to be designed to represent Drew Park. I mean, I think that's really important, that the character and the aesthetics of them represent Drew Park. But I think it's also an opportunity to do something, because Drew Park is largely a group of businesses that do different things, is to use businesses within Drew Park to actually produce whatever we end up designing. Potentially. That's a dream, but that's something that we think is certainly a possibility in a community like this. And we think that these also create an opportunity for public art. So let me go over. The first thing is they need to reflect the local community. And when you drive through, at least, I would say the northern, 3/5 or whatever, north of MLK, you get a real sense of the business community. These are just a few images that I picked out just to try and kind of tell you, kind of get the image that we're getting there. Lots of businesses that do different things. They produce different types of work. I mean, all the way from, there's door manufacturers, there's marble supply companies, there's a lot of automotive companies, there's a lot of construction that's a part of this, services. There's glass pros, there's several glass shops that are in here. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different types of business in here. There's also, as I mentioned, a lot of residential. And that brings children, families, and there's a significant number of churches in this community. So that brings people from outside the community also into the community. And those are predominantly pedestrians. I mean, or they are people that drive here, they get out of their car, they can see the community, they can engage in part of the community. There's character associated with it, and these are not pictures of this community, but when I think of what is the character that I would like to, if you could walk away in the end and say, what is the character of Drew Park after we're complete, I think what we want to accomplish is that we want to communicate that this is an economically successful and viable community. We want to communicate that to everybody who drives through it. It's one which instills pride. It's one that says that the people here are creative, that it's a safe place. It's a safe place to live. We want to add this, environmentally responsible. I'm going to tell you that's, everywhere I go now, environmental awareness and concern is very much a part of almost every place that I go. And we do a lot of work in a lot of different areas. And while we may think mostly about business, there are residual effects associated with environmental awareness that would help, that help in that community. Yes?
Talking about environmentally responsible, one, they won't pick up recyclables, and two, they won't pick up yard waste.
One of the challenges of a community like this and setting a design, we're hoping is a pretty bold, long-term plan, is that there are so many current issues we have to deal with. So I'm just going to ask you to bear with me, as we sort of lay out this, because you have to see a little bit of the future, I guess, and what it could be. Not that we've got all the answers today, but we definitely want your input. This is a very important issue because it's the basic, we have to deal with the basic necessities and the basic requirements in order to move to the next spot. That's just a part of it. Why do anything if we can't deal with that? So it's an important issue. Material images. Now I'm headed towards what I'm talking about here is this idea of identification, community, and identifiers. So what I wanted to sort of seed in your mind is the idea of what are some of the materials that we would incorporate as a part of the design concept. And when I think of sort of the business industry and the idea of doing different things with your hands or building things or incorporating business as a part of it, these are the sort of materials that I think of. Now these are just general materials that I got there, but there's images such as automobiles, and I couldn't find a car, so I got. But the transportation aspects of what the community is all about. The industry and the barrels that appear. Some of the materials and glass and stone and plastics and so forth that are all a part of it, including metal. So what we did was we kind of took all of that and we said, well, what could we do? What should we do as appropriate for gateway type solutions? Now we defined that there should be two types of gateways. One should be something that is narrow and vertical that communicates the idea of Drew Park, and one that should be more seen from a distance and large and a little bit more visually. So as you're going by it on these, especially Dale Mabry, and you travel down Dale Mabry at a fairly good rate of speed, 45 to 50 to probably on up. We want to be able to quickly give a repetitive idea of what this community could be. So we designed two features, one which would be 12 feet high. I'm going to show you two options, but the parameters are, one would be 12 feet high, so that when you drive through it, it creates a sense of symmetry, and it creates a sense of enclosure, so that it's over a human scale, and it's something that you can visually see. And that could incorporate pieces of materials that are that I just spoke about, either concrete or metal or glass, as a part of that. And so it would be very simple in its character, and then Drew Park could be something that would be easily lit and easily communicate an idea of business. The other one would be something that is, sorry, this doesn't shine very bright, but it's about 8 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, and it would be more out along Dale Mabry. And then there are other elements throughout the community that we could see where we might want to introduce smaller features also, planters and so forth. Those might find elements, and we designed them in similar character. So we came up with one option here and then a second option just to show you a couple of variations of the same sort of thing. One which is a more direct sort of idea of taking maybe a gear and making it a part of a project to sort of talk about, communicate the idea of Drew Park as a working business community. And you might think, well, we're residential. And I think that if you see, what I want to do is I'll show you some images where these elements are then softened with landscape materials, especially. They begin to merge with some of the other concepts that I'm going to talk to you about. But they can, on these major streets, say at MLK, and this is right there at Yankee Stadium between the new Mercedes-Benz, where we have a roadway with very limited access, we can provide for a vertical element that brings a sense of scale, that communicates a sense of identity for having arrived at Drew Park. On Lewis Avenue, we can do the same thing. It can frame the street as you begin to enter into the community. It becomes a very simple and subtle, but very visually attractive way to communicate with the community. This is, in the future, as Drew Park, as Lewis gets developed, the road, it's difficult to see here. I'm sorry, we're probably going to, I've avoided intentionally because I know this is going to be a problem showing these up here. There's only a few of them I'm going to talk to you about. We're going to really need to speak to the boards to get a sense of it. But in the future, what we see here is that those pilings, those markers, become framework for future pedestrian and streetscape. So here you see where there's new sidewalks on either side, and then landscape area and a I'm going to talk a little bit more about Lois in a second. I just wanted to, since I was on Hillcraft, I wanted to touch on that. The community identifiers, or these signage, are more like this size, so that they're scaled more of a human scale, but they're visual. So they can be repeated along Dale Mabry, and they can be designed in combination with cabbage palm plantings, which would be on the streets themselves. So you will see the cabbage palms, and then you can have a lighted piece of identifier out on the street that begins to communicate an identity that we were talking about. This is a plan. So here on Osborne, this is just one example. This would be slightly modifications of every one of the streets based upon where signage or what the existing conditions are, where you have a palm, what we refer to as a palm grouping or a palm-a-lette, so that you can visually see that. So if you drive, and I drive Dale Mabry every day, I've been driving it for the past couple of weeks and sort of mentally envisioning the idea of what if we did this. And I think if you do that, you'll start to see how a consistent theme of plantings like this would really begin to, in a very inexpensive and affordable way, a quick way, begin to communicate a new image for Drew Park. The other thing we said is we wanted to create historical markers. As I mentioned, there's historical sites throughout the community. We have not identified those. We've been told about them. We still, as part of our design, we need to know where those are. And we see creating the potential, depending upon what those sites are, as having markers that would tell the story between that site. But more importantly, we feel like that one of the things about telling a story about a community is it's really, if you're going to tell a story and it's going to have any details associated with it, it really needs to be told at a pedestrian level. It needs to be told to somebody that's there, or they can get around it, or they can stand around it. And for the most part, we can incorporate that throughout the community in small ways, but there's a great opportunity because of the large volumes of people, and specifically when there's events going on at Raymond James Stadium, of incorporating them in this area right now, which is at Tampa Bay Boulevard. I think that's a great opportunity right there to begin to do a pedestrian scale signage that would begin to talk about the history of Drew Park. There's images, there's stories there, and I think it's a great opportunity. The other thing is that once you get to the roundabout, if the roundabout in the development of this median space gives you another place where you can symbolize or put artistic pieces, or there's some people that have talked about, maybe potentially an airplane or something like that. The median provides you with that opportunity to do that, which then gives that median some purpose, some function, and gives you a reason to go there, creates a place where we can connect it to the rest of here. But the idea is that if you've ever gone to an event at Raymond James, you stand there on a corner, oftentimes it's raining, or especially in the summer, there's a lot of events that happen. It's hot, it's sunny, and you have to stand there and wait for traffic. It seems like that would be a great opportunity to incorporate both a place that would provide some protection and also begin to be a place where you could stand and learn more about this community. So, this is the future. I want to go to the future here so I can talk about the idea of how the Tampa Bay Boulevard may look and feel somewhere in the future. If you drive through the community right now, the best road is Cargo Road. As far as it's beautiful, it was just completed. It's got great access. It's got a wide path that's on the airport side. It's got a nice sidewalk. It's got bicycle paths on both sides, and it continues. Here it starts up here. You can barely see it. It's all the way down, and actually the newest construction stops here. But this construction is actually in pretty good shape. But what's happened is that while that provides a great access for the community and the airport back here, it stops. And it seems appropriate to us that it would certainly be a great idea if the city could begin to look at this as an interconnected roadway and develop Tampa Bay Boulevard as the same quality as Cargo Road. So that's what we're suggesting. We've begun conversations with the city and said, why don't you think about this? They directed us to look at some studies. and come back to that. So we are in the middle of that process, but we think that that is a great opportunity. And obviously it's an expense, it's something that's not in the plans right now, it's not in the 5-year plan, it's not in any plans. But it is a part of the MPO plan for improving pedestrian connections and bicycle connections of this community with the greater Tampa Bay area. So there are some connections out there that make it a viable place to look at these sort of improvements. The other thing that makes it viable is the plans that Hillsborough Community College is proposing. If Hillsborough Community, and also the airport. Because if you stand out there today, what you see is FedEx in this location, and a large number of trucks that now turn and travel Tampa Bay Boulevard. It gets a lot of truck traffic, and it's driven because of what's happening here. What's missing is any sort of pedestrian improvements or enhancements that would make that connection out to Del Meade. To me, that becomes a very important, attractive roadway that could really strengthen this community. The other thing that it does is it creates a perimeter that is not 2 sides, but it creates a 4-sided perimeter and creates more opportunities for people to enter into Drew Park, become more of an identified place. So what we have began to conceptualize here is a road that would have a divided median, or would be divided by a median. Very similar. It's not as wide as the median is right now on Cargill Road, but it is a planted median that could be designed to be very much in character with what is happening along Cargill Road. And then to create a new pedestrian promenade, if you will, or esplanade that would shade people as they walk to the parking lot, because there's an intense amount of pedestrian walkway through here. That begins to become a real nice, attractive aesthetic that starts to communicate the value of this particular community, and especially that intersection. To me, that's one of those things that I sit there and think, speaking, I know there's, to me, that's one of those things that benefits the Hillsborough Community College, from the standpoint of a new entry to their to the college. It benefits the airport, it benefits all of the businesses that are along there, and it benefits the community. It really creates a new opportunity. So we're looking at that as a way to create a new boulevard street. As you go into the median where it's divided, can you see that? It's probably pretty difficult to see. We may have to talk about it later. Right now, what you have is a deep channel which goes through the middle of this park and really bifurcates. It separates one side from the next. And there's a lot of asphalt that's on the south side of the road that's left over there. And this really, we look back at historical photographs, this road is clearly visible, and this median is visible in the earliest plans in the when Drew Park was originally implemented as an Air Force base in the 40s. So we think that this makes that median fairly significant, from a historical perspective, because it creates an opportunity to then leverage that existing history into a new park. And what we can do is we can gently meander that that swale. We can take it back. We can by actually laying out. Sorry, I know civil engineering room. I got to close your ears. we can maintain the same volumes by trimming back the sides and planting that swale, and we can create a nice aesthetic, attractive walkway system that would cross that swale with bridges and create seating opportunities and connect that to a larger walkway system that I'm going to talk to you about in a second. So this creates an opportunity to use the median and to then connect it with bicycle trails and walking trails, and that's very closely connected with the residential area, so it creates a place to go on the walk. Okay, it's taking longer than I hoped. Create a system of connected walks and trails. And what you see here is sort of an idea of new, improved, wide sidewalks throughout the community. There are some new sidewalks that have been developed, and that's great. and they are very beneficial. One of the things that we're proposing is that in the future that those sidewalks be in areas where they're protected more from traffic. But we see this as the opportunity to create new sidewalks that would provide higher volumes of pedestrian traffic and a connected linear park. This is the Cargo Road project. If we connected it here with the median and Lois Avenue and in the future in McKinney, that could be one connected parkway system with wide sidewalks, with shaded, tree plantings, with artwork, with elements that are along there, places to sit, shade, and that could be a beautiful place for you to then walk into. And that's what we are looking to combine, actually implement as part of the phase 1 of the Lois improvement. Okay. These are some of this is Cargo Road, obviously, but this is just sort of the idea of what we're trying to accomplish, both bicycle and pedestrian walkway systems throughout. As we talk about that, Lois Avenue, I'm going to talk a little bit about Lois Avenue. Right now, what is happening is that we have taken the plans that Bayside is currently developing for the roadway improvements on Lois Avenue. And we've discussed the idea of what do we do with these pedestrian areas. We actually have a fairly significant amount of right-of-way, more so than we often are providing. That creates for a green space and ample sidewalks. So what we can do is create an 8-foot sidewalk on the east side of Lois that is separated from the roadway by a landscape planted area. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Medians could be placed in selective areas only at intersections in order to help to break up the width of the street and create some definition as a safety feature. Throughout the rest of the street, the plan is to have a center lane which you can pull off of your main drive in order to turn left into a driveway. So these are only located at intersections. There's one right there, and there's another one, and these are lighted. And then what we propose, this is a continuation, it's very similar, is to create a green street out of these areas. To actually implement a storm drainage system that would take the water. The old way of doing storm drainage, and still today we do it in many areas, but I should say this is probably the old way. This is actually, one of the growing ideas in street development today is the idea of creating a green street. A place where instead of taking water off of the street and putting that directly into storm systems that then pipe it to a pond, which is someplace else so that you don't see it, but rather than create places that are landscaped that would be low maintenance landscaping so that it is then allowed to percolate into the soil. Now, this is not the same as a ditch. A ditch is basically there to convey the water. It's not planted. The water just moves from one place to the next. If you look at the plantings, or if you look at a ditch, you'll notice there's a lot of culverts, and those culverts allow the water to go from one place to the next. This is still going to have storm inlets as a part of the system. But those storm inlets are located in the landscape area, in these sort of areas. So then, by taking the curb and creating openings in the curb, the water can move from the street into a landscape area, and then it can actually be filtered and penetrate enter into the stormwater system. So we actually get the water off the road faster because we have more opportunities to get it off the road because we have more of these penetrations. And then it is allowed to store in the landscape area so that it feeds then, you get irrigation source, a water source for our planting. It also creates the opportunity to, by planting these things, and there's a number of different ways to plant them. Planting is a tricky thing. I don't want to get into the specifics of planting, but there's ways to plant these so that they are fairly low maintenance. So that all you have to do is to, if we use the right native materials, over time they are established, and so trash pickup becomes really the biggest issue in keeping control of weeds. But this is something that's being accepted by Swiftland and other governmental agencies. It's something that's growing throughout the country in many areas, and it's something we think is very appropriate for this community because of all of the existing stormwater systems. these are some of the images of these types of systems that you can show. This is actually a project that we're completing that's a green street that does the same thing. Bayside and our firm are working together on this, where the water comes through. Right there is an opening. It actually has a little metal, but it's an opening. It takes the water into a channel that is then planted, and you can actually see that that's just been completed in Tarpon Springs. It's on Main Street. Okay, I'm going to try to move quickly so we can move into develop a passive park area. I already mentioned the linear park, and then to create a linear park, or a play park within the residential neighborhood. We are developing that. That's really, there's a lot of discussions going on with the city and the Parks Department about the size and what activities would go there. At this point, what we're looking at is to create in a small, what we call a pocket park, which might have a basketball court, might have a play area for children in the residential area, and then the passive park that would be along the linear park and provide, as I mentioned, shade, structures, artwork. Incorporating artwork throughout the community, there's a lot of industrial art. I think that what that gives is that it provides the opportunity to communicate that this is a creative community. There's ways to invite artists to become engaged in that process. The city has a public arts program. We think that that's something that could generate funds and create more of a community identity. It's something that everybody can get involved with. Here are some different types of artwork that we just picked up on. And then create coordinated lighting and site furnishings is what I want. What we're looking at is to create something that communicates. We have two options here. One, which is sort of a metal tech, the idea of creating metal, more of a high-tech look. You can see durable materials such as the lighting, incorporating that throughout. Or something that maybe communicates durability, that uses more concrete, more stable, and these are just some of our early ideas on how, what we think might be appropriate. Plant palette, where we're at right now, is to incorporate throughout the community very durable native material native palette of plant material. Something that is easy to get established and requires minimal maintenance. Something that requires little water and works in our biosphere. Okay, so the next steps after tonight, obviously, are we're taking this to the Community Redevelopment Agency. We want to present these ideas as far as to them and get their input, tell them where we're at. We'll certainly incorporate the input that we received tonight as part of that. And then we, in about 2 months, we're back again, taking the input of tonight, incorporating that into a final report stage. Our goal is to have a final streetscape beautification master plan complete and approved by the city by September. So it's a fairly aggressive schedule. And then, before I wrap it up, once this is complete, those ideas that are associated with the plan will be incorporated into Lois and Grady streetscape.